All right, I'm going to bring the meeting to order at 7:06. Michael Stankoff is taking minutes. Welcome, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Also on the call with us is Nick Levine from the CVC, streaming for the Community Voice channel, Kristen Gorley and Emily Bradley from the Board of Finance. My error was to not put public comment on the agenda, and I apologize for that. So may I have a motion, please, to amend the agenda to add public comment? And I would like to do that as item 2.
I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you, Jim. Is there a second?
Second, Adam.
Thank you, Adam. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your hands, please, if you're in favor.
Aye. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. And thank you. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. So now we will move on to public comment. Is there anyone on the call who would like to make any comments?
I guess, Gwen, I don't have the agenda in front of me, so one of the reasons why I wanted to attend was just to share sort of my thoughts on the Board of Finance.
Great.
If it would be appropriate to say it now, I'd be happy to do that. If it would be more appropriate later on in the conversation, I can do that too.
I think now is the best time.
Okay. I know that you have had a chance to meet with the entire Board of Finance and have gotten sort of everybody's view. I wanted to sort of share what my own personal view was and what I see as the role of the Board of Finance. I see us as the financial conscience of the town. We are a neutral body, and we have the overall best interest of the town as our central focus of what we do and how we act. We're all different people with all different backgrounds, but I think that gives us a unique perspective that each of us bring to the discussions. And I think that since we are each elected based on our talents and views, it sort of gives us a great ability to take a holistic view of the town and its services and make financial decisions accordingly. I know there's discussion to eliminate the Board of Finance, and I know other towns do not have a Board of Finance, but I haven't heard what the alternative would look like. So without knowing what that change would look like, I don't feel comfortable with eliminating the Board of Finance. I can't support eliminating it. Having that group look across all of the budgets, looking at the economy, what's going on in the state, going on in the country, going on just in general these days, especially, and having us make informed and impartial decisions with the best interests of the town, I think is critical. And so I'm very uncomfortable with some of this discussions about eliminating the Board of Finance without really understanding how you can accomplish some of the things that we do in terms of the financial conscience of the town. I guess that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Good. Is there anybody else from the public who would like to make a comment?
Gwen, I had my hand raised. I didn't know.
Yeah, I just saw that. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know what your protocol is. But I would like to just kind of piggyback on what Emily had just brought up and just kind of extend a couple of additional thoughts as well as my opinion. Being a newer member and having a different perspective, looking at the difference between, the monthly meetings as well as going into budget season and all that entails, I know that some of the discussion has been around, well, coming up with different committees and, do we really need to have the monthly meetings? And I would like to just give my perspective as a newer member and just talking about how important those meetings are as far as staying in touch with both boards, the Board of Education, as well as the needs for the Board of Selectmen. And again, it goes back to Emily's comments of being the financial conscience of the town and having a separate kind of bird's eye view of what the needs are. And when we have those monthly meetings and going into detail and asking the questions from both the Board of Selectmen as well as from Sandy, in addition to Kristen Hecht has always made herself very available to attending those meetings. That was invaluable when we went into this budget season. Also taking in consideration the pandemic, COVID-19, we were really working with a moving target. And it was so important to be in touch in real time with what was going on with all the different financial aspects of the town. And a lot of that just came from the regular meetings, the work of all the board members, the different perspectives from all the board members that were representative from, basically the people who elected us from the town, and how important that was in actually getting this budget accomplished this last season. So just based on that, in conjunction with Emily's comments, those are some of the reasons why I would say that I am against the elimination of the Board of Finance, especially since there's no viable alternative that has been laid out at this point in time. In addition to the fact, I think it would be a very dangerous thing to do when we're such at a pivotal moment with what's going on with COVID-19 and some of those financial stressors that not just Bolton's going through, but the entire nation, to try and just do an overhaul with a significant part of the town's government. I just don't think that's really in the town's best interest as a whole.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Is there any other member of the public who would like to make a comment at this point? Okay, let's move on then to item 3 on the agenda, which is to act on the minutes of April 16th regular meeting, May 20th special meeting, May 21 regular meeting. Michael, did you have a chance to research that question about the April 16th minutes?
I did, yes. So to clarify, again, Michael Stankoff, board clerk here. To clarify, the question that was on the table, let me just pop open the meeting minutes in question, because this question came up at the regular meeting on the 21st of May. The meeting in question was asking about the specific towns that Mr. Hayes had mentioned as being towns which had similar, here we are, towns which had similar systems. Get to this.
It's on page 4 of the meeting minutes from April 16th.
Thank you. Apologies all. I'm just trying to open these things up so we have them right in front of me, as I had the other meeting minutes open. Agenda item 5, paragraph 4, line 7, stating that Hebron has an identical model, was what was in the notes. Mr. Hayes stated that he remembered that it would be Hebron, Ellington, and Somers had an identical model. Mr. Brudds stated that he remembered differently and believed the line should read Hebron and Vernon had an identical model. I went back and looked at the meeting minutes, and Hebron and Vernon were the 2 towns mentioned. Now, there was, in the same breath as that statement, and perhaps because it might have been a little bit difficult to remember, G. Marion was talking about, Gwen was talking about the town of, I believe, Portland. And so there were several other towns that were talked about because there were comparisons made between the town of Portland, as well as comparisons made between the towns of Hebron and Vernon. However, in the specific context that Mr. Hayes was talking about, the towns were Hebron and Vernon.
Okay, so we have not acted on the April 16th regular meeting minutes. So, Michael, so I think what I'm hearing is that,
Gwen,
Yeah.
there was supposed to be one more change to that meeting, those meeting minutes, and that was a switching in the name of Rich Hayes and Mr. Toomey on the third page of those minutes. Was that also changed?
Right.
That has been acknowledged and changed in the minutes. When
Yep,
these
good.
minutes are accepted, I will submit that change.
Okay, good.
okay, so on page 4, the references to the towns, it should be Hebron and Vernon, is that
Yes,
correct?
that was what was in the recording, yes. And then the other change is agenda item 4, paragraph 2, lines 2 to 6. R. Hayes and J. Toomey, I misattributed who spoke, and I had their names swapped. And so that will also be changed.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the April 16th regular meeting minutes with the addition of the town of Vernon on page 4 and the switching of the attribution of the comments on page 3?
So moved.
That was Adam? Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
That was Jay.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
and is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor? Raise your hand.
Aye.
And John? Okay, yes, okay, that's unanimous. Thank you.
For the record, Gwen, for the
Yes.
record, unanimous, I'm voting no, and I did not raise my hand.
Oh,
Thank you.
excuse me, I'm sorry, Rich, I missed that. Okay, so it was not unanimous. Ayes are 6, 1 opposed, correct, Rich? Okay. Rich,
Correct.
thank you for correcting me. Thank you for correcting me on that. I didn't see that. Are there any abstentions? Okay, now the May 20th and the May 21st meeting minutes, as you saw, I got those out to you today. There was a mix-up at Town Hall about the status of those minutes, and that's why they got to you so late. So, and they're long. So I know that if you didn't have a chance to read them, that's completely understandable, and we can table the minutes until the July meeting. What would you like to do about that?
I have no objection to proceeding with those minutes today, but I would defer to whoever.
Okay, is there anybody who would like to table them? I really don't think that that's a problem to do that if you need more time to look at them.
I have some corrections that need to be made in that.
Okay, so may I have a motion to approve the May 20th special meeting minutes?
So moved. Adam.
Adam, is there a second?
Yeah, I will second that. This is Jay.
Jay? Okay, discussion? Eleanor, did you have some comments?
Yeah, on page 3, line 1, you have, it takes an enormous among of time, and it should be amount of time. And there's 2 corrections on page 5. The first paragraph is left hanging. Not sure what was meant to be in there. And in
Yes.
the first sentence of the third paragraph, it's pretty garbled. It should be G. Marion next thank J. Kelly
For his letter concerning.
different forms. And you should take out his letter concerning. which
Yes.
is redundant.
So I see those. That is a mistake. I have marked both of those in red text.
It it's not a correction, but just could you number pages from now on?
Yes, I will number pages from now on.
I numbered all of mine myself.
Apologies.
That's, I
No
noticed,
problem.
I noticed on page 2, the first paragraph, second line, we're performing that should be done. The word
Ah.
one should be done. And also then on page 3, right after the correction that Eleanor pointed out, an enormous amount of time and manpower, and then it says to get, to come. So I think you should just remove to get. So it would
Yes, to get is superfluous there.
correct.
It is marked and will be removed.
Okay. Are there any other comments on the May 20th minutes? Hearing none, all in favor? Raise your hand. Opposed? Rich? Abstentions? Okay, the minutes passed with 1 opposed. May I have a motion to approve the May 21st regular meeting minutes?
I move to approve the May 21st regular meeting minutes.
Jay,
Second.
is Adam second?
Second,
Is there
Adam.
discussion? Yep, thank you. Is there discussion? I saw one thing. It's on the 1, 2, 3, 4. It's on the 5th page. 4th paragraph down that begins R. Hayes stated. In the last line, there's a statement, they would be able to effectively fulfill the role of administrator without the need for a full-time administrator that needs to be fired by a board of many individuals. So I don't know what that means, and I would ask for clarification, what you all think that was supposed to say.
If I might clarify, and I can make sure this reflects in the text, because this was a part of the minutes that I did go back and listen to the recording for myself. These statements, the initial they implies a strong first selectman would be able to effectively fulfill the role of administrator in the way that S. Pirog currently does, without the need for a full-time paid administrator that currently needs to be fired by a board of many individuals if they need to be gotten rid of. The conversation had at this point in the 21st May meeting turned to the idea of, I believe, accountability between the voters being able to vote someone out versus a town administrator requiring, as it currently stands, a 4 out of 5 vote, but a 3 out of 5 vote of the Board of Selectmen to remove. So this line is specifically stating, and Mr. Hayes, please correct me if I misconstrue your point here in any way, shape, or form, that a first selectman with the skills that the current first selectman displays could, were they a full-time individual, fulfill the role of administrator without needing a full-time administrative officer, similar to the role that Josh Kelly currently fulfills. That individual would be able to be held accountable to the voters directly at election time and not need to go through a complicated firing process that currently involves a board of many individuals, which could become political.
I think just the section of that line that reads a board of many individuals, that's the only part of that I think needs to be clarified.
Absolutely.
Did we say something like need to be fired by a majority of a board, or?
I can tweak that to the first selectman would be able to effectively fulfill the role of administrator without the need for a full-time administrative officer. that currently needs to be fired by a majority of the Board of Selectmen, a process that could potentially become political.
Commission members, is that what we talked about? Fired by a majority of the Board of Selectmen?
Eleanor's on mute.
Oh, yeah, Eleanor, make sure were you on mute?
I said, I agree. I think if he just replaces the pronouns with the proper nouns, we're fine.
So administrative officer that needs to be fired by a majority of the Board of Selectmen?
Correct.
I think it should say not needs to be, but could be.
Okay,
Right.
could be fired by a majority of the Board of Selectmen. Are people comfortable with that vision?
Well, is this, I mean, this section was as stated by Rich, right? This is
Right.
Rich talking, so I'm interested in what Rich says he said.
Rich, how do you feel about this revision?
It's fine.
Okay, thank you.
As it currently stands, the line at the end of this fourth paragraph on page 5 now reads, a full-time first selectman would be able to effectively fulfill the role of administrator without the need for a full-time administrative officer that could be fired by a majority of the Board of Selectmen, which he views as a process that could potentially become political.
Rich, is that acceptable?
You know, Gwen, I haven't read these. I didn't know that they were sent out, but it sounds fine. I just can't tell by the context, but it's regardless, it's not material here. So let's just move them on, please.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments on the minutes of the May 21st meeting? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your hands.
Aye.
Thank you, John. Opposed? Rich? Abstentions? Okay, so the minutes pass with one opposed. Okay, thank you. Let's go on now to review the proposed flow chart for our future work. And Eleanor, since you designed this, would you lead us through a discussion of this, please?
Happy to. I think the work is only good if everybody says, yes, this is obvious. So I think if this is an obvious way to go about our business, then I think that we did our job in putting this together. The goal was just to create a graphic so that we understand that a lot of the decisions that we've been asked to make that are enumerated in the sheet that the Board of Selectmen gave us really depend on us first deciding what form of government happens in the town and then deciding how the revisions flow out of that form of government. That was pretty much the goal.
Did that work? I just tried to
Yeah.
share. It did?
It did.
Is that what
Oh,
you're
that's
looking at?
great.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Oh, good. Because I can't see it on my screen, but. So does anybody have any comments on this?
This is
I think it looks fine, Gwen. Could make sense.
Is this just to address, this is Adam, is this just to address the issue of form of government, right? Not,
That is correct. So what you don't see on the screen, or maybe, can I scroll down? No, you can't scroll down.
no,
Is
I have it in front of me, so I've
okay.
got it, but the decision stuff at the bottom, I understand, okay.
So,
I certainly agree it's the process.
yeah, I mean, I like that. So I love flowcharts. So this is great. The concern I have is, and I think number one is definitely number one with a bullet, and we can do that. But number 2 and 3 are kind of entangled with each other. And as you heard Emily and Kristen talk, they're concerned. So so their concern is they're not ready to eliminate the BOF until they know what the new world looks like, right? And we
Right.
haven't done a lot of work. We've been like, well, should we just get rid of the BOF, and then, you know, if that happens, we'll figure out what the world looks like. So that's a little tricky, and a lot of the Board of Selectmen revisions are probably predicated, you know, I think the number of selectmen and a few things like that were predicated on it changes whether or not there's a Board of Finance on some
Correct.
of those things, right? So
Correct. Yeah, 2 and 3 really sort of have to happen simultaneously. And I think that when we do make those decisions, Jay, one of the most important things we can do is enumerate the checks and balances so that we're sure that we've got the budget, as it were, for the town covered in a way that everybody's going to be agreeing with.
yeah, I agree with that. That's so I think I agree. The very first one, I think I'm all on board with, and then 2 and 3 are kind of all going to be in the same bucket.
Yeah.
Talk through.
And I think the decisions at the bottom, Jay, you came up with this idea last month of having the ready for draft column. And what we can do is, my thought was to start, once we get the board of the form of government issue resolved, then we would, and possibly the Board of Finance issue resolved, then we would start to just go top to bottom through the charter, starting with chapter 2 and go all the way to chapter 13. So under decisions on the left-hand column, we'd have chapter 2, 2.5, and then if we all agree with that, we write 2.5 in the right-hand column, and just
Gwen,
proceed.
just for your information, that part of the chart didn't appear on our screen.
Oh, okay.
Just the decision-making appeared, but we do have boxes down below so that we can have the decisions that we make and then moving them over one by one into the ready for draft column.
Oh, I didn't.
It's not on what she put up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see it on the thing you guys.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. The one question I would ask is this: do we have is there going to be like a keeper of the list, of the drafting list, right? So in other words, I mean, right now I think we have the coin toss is on the ready to draft list. And is there somebody who is sort of the keeper of the ready to draft list, that will, once we move things to that list, we'll have an authoritative system of record of,
I think we could make this chart as dynamic as we want as the decisions get made. And then we can keep updating the decisions in the ready for draft and maybe put another column in there of drafted.
Yeah.
So that we can start, kind of keeping track of where we are, how far we've gotten with things. So I think we could keep this a dynamic chart and just update it for each meeting.
I'm down.
Eleanor, are you volunteering to do that?
Sure. With some advice from our chairman, yes.
Good. Okay. So that would be great. So you would just make sure every time we talk about a section, you write down the section. If we all agree to the concept of the revisions, you would put that in ready for draft.
Sure.
And then,
Sure.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So if everybody thinks that, do we think that this is a decent roadmap for continuing on?
I just want to add a quick comment.
Yes.
I think that very flexible in terms of proceeding this format, so I want to emphasize that. But I see number 2 as being like an independent item. I think no matter what we do, because of candidate recruitment and other issues, going to 4-year terms staggered for the selectmen, I think there's universal support for that. I think that's an independent issue. The challenge is what you do with number 1 and number 3 really have to happen at the same time. If the Board of Finance is eliminated, and that's been under consideration, that's a lot of those duties are going to flow to the selectmen. And in terms of getting the community behind that, how the selectmen's roles morph so they're more attuned to education has to be factored in. So I'm not certain if 1 comes first or 3, but if you want to go with number 1 for starters, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, when I was looking at this first, and Gwen and I did talk this over when we put the chart together, we realized that these first 3 are almost simultaneous. But I think if you're looking at it from the public's point of view, it's probably going to be, wow, we just changed the selectmen, and then I think it's going to be. But you're right, Jim. They're all entangled.
Any other comments about the flow chart? Okay, I'm going to click stop share and hope that that goes well. Okay, good. All right, let's move on to the item 5, new item 5, which is continuing business review town charter. And what I'd like to do is really get into a deep conversation now about the form of government. We've heard a lot of different comments. We've reached out to a lot of different groups, a lot of different people from out of town. So I think we have a good foundation to have a discussion about it. And I would like to ask whoever would want to kick off the conversation.
Well, seems like I'm willing to. I think we have to be practical in our approach, and as far as the idea of changing from what we have now to a full-time professional town manager, I think realistically, if our current first selectman is against it, and there's a substantial amount of opposition to it, that it isn't going to happen. So, and I'm probably the strongest proponent of it, but unless there, and I think we ought to maybe even take a straw vote or a consensus check, because if there aren't, 4 or 5 people interested in doing that now on this commission, then it's not going to happen, and we shouldn't waste our time on it. And just eliminated it from the 3 options.
So Adam, I am where you are on that. So as this discussion will unfold, you'll find I'm all for a strong-ish administrator / manager, but I don't think the politics would line up for it. So I don't think it's a hill worth dying on. So I agree. We can, if I'm perfectly fine with disposing of that option, and let's concentrate our discussion elsewhere. Unless we think there's people who want to do it, and then I'll get on that bandwagon.
I concur with Jay and Adam. I think we could lose some ground if we go down the town manager path with all the other challenges we're facing.
I mean, I'll be clear. I would support a town manager, but if there isn't pretty strong support for it, I think it's a waste of our time to talk about it.
Eleanor.
I think I'm in favor of the strong first selectman, because they're the ones who have a stakehold in the community. And Sandy was really clear that Bolton is just going to become a training ground for people who are stepping to other places. We're not going to get a town manager or a town administrator here who's going to be committed to the community and stay for 6 years because, the salary's so good and everything else. They're probably, those people who are going to be applying for town manager, town assistant, town administrator are probably going to be from outside the community. They're not going to stay for very long. You're going to have the same problems with them as we do with the school for people who are coming in and, working their way up the ladder in administration. If you have somebody in town, it's not only is it elected, your money's staying in town with somebody that we've all elected and who has a stakehold in the town. And from a voter perspective, I think the strong first selectman I think we could make a really good case for paying that person who's already here and who already cares about our community. And they're elected. I don't know how, when somebody's elected, it's pretty easy to get rid of them if you don't like them. And if somebody's not elected but hired, I've gone through these minutes and seen where they say, well, you have to buy out their contract, you have to, wait out their contract. There's a whole lot of issues that happen if somebody's not elected and has a contract for a lot of money with the town. It's paying somebody a lot of money to do something for a town that they may or may not care about. I don't like it. I like to know that the people who are serving the town care about the town, and that means living here and being here.
Rich, did you want to add any comments?
Do I want to add any comments? At this point, I don't think I do, Gwen. No, I think I'm just going to listen for a while longer. Thank you, though.
Okay, John, what about you?
I'm not sure if living here makes that much of a difference. Back in the olden days, we elected the town clerk and the town treasurer and the town tax collector, and there was something else. And we no longer do that. And do we think that those people care less about their jobs than if they had lived in town? I don't know, but I don't think that's really quite true. The thing I worry about is competency in the candidates that in the future will become first selectmen. We're lucky right now. We've been lucky in the past. And over all these years, we've had some that were not quite. I don't mean that they were bad. They just weren't the same caliber as, say, somebody like Mike Reba or Sandy. They were fine as people and as fine as doing their job, and they were conscientious. It's a crapshoot going to a strong first selectman. I think the plague that we've gone through for the last 3 months kind of illustrates that. We need to find somebody every 2 years or every 4 years, well into the future, who could handle something that comes up that unique. Because you never know what's going to happen. I'm sure I have other thoughts, but they just all escaped me.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Oh, Eleanor?
But from what John just said, John, I'd really like to address what you just said. If you're reading resumes every 2 years and trying to hire somebody off of a resume, as opposed to vetting from your neighbors and hiring somebody for a 6-year term, I think that's just a really different situation.
I think we're looking at resumes if they're either a first selectman candidate or somebody that's actually employed by the town. Chances are the people that are looking for that kind of work already are qualified, and they probably have gone to college for public administration or whatever other degrees would provide the necessary experience, training, and education to do that job just by walking in. We've have seen a perfect example of that happening just this past summer. Whether that continues to happen, again, that's another crapshoot.
I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say somebody just walked in.
Nor am I, so I'm very interested in understanding that aspect of your comments.
We just hired a new town administrator.
Are you referring to Josh Kelly then?
That's what.
Okay.
Know about that?
You're referring to Josh Kelly?
Yeah, we just
Okay.
hired somebody brand new, and that, I mean, technically that is a crapshoot, and we don't know. You know, the resume. Some people, their resumes look great, and can they really do it? Sometimes not.
Right, but what I'm saying
We're
is
lucky.
that it's
And,
not
you
the
know,
crapshoot if you're hiring somebody who lives in town that is accountable to all their neighbors.
well, they're accountable, but we don't know that they're going to actually be trained in municipal administration
Well, but I think
and
part of
whether
the
they can
argument,
perfume.
right, but part of the argument for getting a strong selectman is that it's going to, we would set it up to attract that kind of person. In other words, here's a strong first selectman position where we've adjusted the term, say, to 6 years or 4 years, and with the salary to go with it, are you willing to do this for your neighbors? And people would say, yes, I'm willing to do this because my commute is short. I love my town. It's commensurate pay. And that makes it, and suddenly that becomes very attractive to somebody in town who has the right skills.
I think that's a tougher candidate to find within our own border. Not that it can't happen.
So I'm going to weigh in on this. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
No,
go ahead.
I wanted to hear you. Yes, you go first, Gwen.
Okay, thank you. The way I've been trying to think about this is why do we want to change our form of government? Like what are the problems that we're seeing now in a first selectman town administrator form of government that we think have to be changed? Because maybe, you know, if there is change needed, and if so, why? And so I thought back on my service on the Board of Selectmen, and I realized that it was more personality issues, and how the people in the first selectman and administrative officer roles functioned in their roles. That was more of the issue than how the charter was written. There was some, in some circumstances, that there not a lot of attention was paid to the charter in how those people fulfilled those roles. So that was not a problem with the charter. It was more how the people who were in those roles saw how they should be acting in those roles. So I can't say, yes, we definitely need to bail out of the first selectman town administrator form of government. That's why I'm not ready to give up yet on the current form of government. I think going back to one point that Eleanor made, I think people in Bolton love being able to vote for their leader. I think it would be very hard to ask people to give that up, meaning go to a town manager form of government. People really like to go to the polls and know that they're voting for so-and-so, their neighbor down the street. So maintaining a first selectman form of government gives people that sense that they are in control of who their leader is. I don't support, I'm not leaning toward anyway, a strong first selectman, because that would mean giving up on the administrative position. And I don't think, Jay brought this up last month, we can't pay two people. We can't pay a high paid first selectman. We can't pay as well as a high paid administrative person. So we would have to give up that administrative position. And I don't think that the pool of candidates in Bolton is big enough to find somebody who's going to be willing to give up their full-time job in order to take on this job, so that that person will fulfill all of the very broad set of jobs that role will entail. I think that there can be some adjustments. I think part of what also happened in the past is that we suffered from a lack of a contract with the administrative officer until probably about 5 or 6 years ago. When I got on the board, that was one of the things that I pushed for, I worked toward. And the first time, so that administrative officer for the first time in 13 years, I think, had a contract was put in place. And I think that that could have, if that had been done earlier, I think things would have been done differently. There, the terms, there was never until 13 years into the job, the charter was not followed in terms of reviewing that person's job, which is under the charter too. The charter requires the administrative officer to have an annual review, and that was not done for the first 13 years of that person's service. So again, that was not a charter problem. It was a problem with the people who were serving in those positions. So I just can't say, this charter didn't work, because there are things that could be better about this charter, but that's not only it. It's personalities too. And that's always the risk that you run, no matter who is in that position. It's not just the people that came in the past. I'm sure that we'll have people serving in positions in the future that we don't feel are up to standards either. So our job is to create a charter that will withstand the ebb and flow of the talent of the people who are serving in those positions. But I do feel that we can continue with a first selectman town administrator form of government by one, sharpening up employment contract, two, sharpening up the description and making sure that this description of the town administrator position that's in the charter meshes with the employment contract, and somehow making sure that the first selectman and the other selectmen know what the terms of the charter are and abide by those terms. So that's my long answer to saying that I support a first selectman town administrator form of government with some clarity to the administrator position.
I'd vote for that.
Jay.
Sure. So yeah, and I think you hit on a few of the things I was thinking. So as I said before, my comments before were only limited to the straw poll, and I think we've sort of elided that, and we're going away from. We're not going to discuss that. So now we'll talk about what I do think, which is that I am starting to come up with a vision of a slightly modified first selectman town administrator model. One where we change the title to conform with expectations, call it a town administrator, not a chief administrative officer or whatever the more standard title is. I think we could probably put a few boundaries around contractual provisions in the charter. We don't want to state too much, but we might want to put a few pieces in there, what the maximum, like Eleanor, you talked about the buyout. So what the maximum termination for convenience would be allowed to be, things like that. We could put a few things in there that would put some protections and make sure that the job was what we wanted. Once again, the review process, I think we need to fix that. I'm wondering if there's a way we can put teeth in that. And I'm not sure exactly what that is, but maybe the first selectman's stipend doesn't get paid until the review is done or something. There are checks and balances methods we could make sure reviews are done, because really, who has standing to sue under a charter violation? I don't even know. How would you do that? Right. I got no idea. Simple majority for termination of the chief administrator, or sorry, I'm doing it wrong myself, for the town administrator. And one thing I thought about is maybe a set of default delegations of power in the charter that would be revocable by the selectmen under certain circumstances. So in other words, historically our problem was the town administrator was acting with a bunch of powers that were not formally delegated or were maybe delegated in the midst of time. And Josh shows up and there's no piece of paper that says he has these powers, and everybody's wondering where those powers went. Maybe we're specific with those. Maybe we do assign some additional power to the town administrator, or maybe we have some default delegation of power to the town administrator that under certain circumstances can be revoked and pulled back to the Board of Selectmen. So in other words, for day-to-day running things, it's good to have the administrator be the chief executive, right? Them be the boss. And I think that sounds like it would work, but maybe, who knows if personalities change, maybe that needs to change at some point. So that's one way we could address that. As far as the other alternative of a strong first selectman, which would be in all but name a mayoral system. I don't think we don't have a great candidate base here in town. Who is going to leave a good job to election, to fight in an election for a job? That seems, how do you recruit somebody for a job? They might win or they might lose. That sounds a little scary to me. The remark about the training ground, I think that cuts both ways. So we could be a training ground for town administrators. We could be a training ground for mayors too, right? I mean, there used to be a saying, I was an aide for a short while at the Connecticut legislature. And the saying was that, every legislator in Connecticut is someone whose deepest, darkest secret has kept them from seeking higher office, right? So if we, a mayor of a town like Bolton is somebody who may just want to move up to be a legislator, there's no reason you wouldn't seek higher office from that. And mayor of a small town is something, or first select person is something that's often seen as a stepping stone to another job. So I think the training ground argument cuts both ways. So, the other question on fireability, right? So I think a town administrator is eminently more fireable than an elected official. Somebody is elected. If it's a 6-year term, you're not going to get them out of there with dynamite, even if they're a nut job. So that really worries me. And, I think what I talked about, some of the constraints we could put on the contractual process in the charter could protect us from some of those things where it would be difficult to fire somebody under a contract. We could bake some contractual protections in there. We don't have that option with an elected leader. We don't have the option. We can't install. I don't think we can install recall in Connecticut or in Bolton. So maybe not. Maybe we could come up with a way to have someone's if the coin comes up heads, the mayor's out of a job. I don't know. That would be one way to do it. So that's a lot of stuff there, but that in brief is the way I'm looking at it.
Thank you, Jay. Adam?
I think I agree with almost everything Jay said. And if anything, I would go even farther in, first of all, again, if there were strong support for a strong elected first selectman, I would probably go that route. And then I would just take the job of administrative officer completely out of the charter and leave it to a strong first selectman and the Board of Selectmen to decide what staff they need to hire. Okay. I personally prefer, and maybe it goes along with what Eleanor was saying, if we're going to give somebody, I prefer having somebody who has clear responsibility for the executive functions that the town needs. And if it's not going to be a person you're going to interview every 3 to 5 years and hire on a contract, then I'd rather have it be somebody elected. If we're going to divide it up between two people, then I prefer to have the charter give what Jay's saying, that we very, very clearly delineate a section of, or a set of authorities for a town administrator when we have somebody good, and give the elected legislature the ability to take it away when they feel it's not working, and that we limit that person's term to, you know, contracts of 3 years, rolling 3-year contracts. You know, give them the power to hire and fire, but only under defined circumstances, and, you know, hope that we can find good people. And I do think if you look at the example of most school systems, you are able to find good people even in a smaller town. It's not impossible. I just feel like, you know, you might have to pay a little more than we pay now. I don't know. I think the problem, and Gwen, I mean, all due respect, I don't think the charter worked well for a long time for this town. I think it worked pretty badly, and personally, and the reason you need a carefully drafted charter is not to deal with the situations when you have great people in office, but when you don't have such great people in office, or people who aren't necessarily skilled at particular things. So, but since it doesn't look like there's, again, 4 or 5 votes for a strong first selectman, I think we should move on toward tightening up the charter's description of administrative officer, or I think town administrator makes more sense, might attract better candidates, and make default choices, but then give the Board of Selectmen the ability to take things away. And maybe give them some more time in office so that they can be more equipped to do that. Thanks.
Rich.
Well, I think Jim Aldridge's hand was up in advance of mine. I'll wait my turn. Thank you.
Okay, Jim.
I thought there's been a lot of good points. So the first thing is I get the impression that there's a consensus that the town manager option might be too much of a sticker shock for the community, and we got to take that off the table. Now we're talking about what is the role of the first selectman versus the role of the town administrator or administrative officer, whatever, okay? And I think there's a lot of, when I listen to everyone talk, I don't know if I get it a crystal clear thing, but there's a range of options within those two things that I don't know if we're going to get through tonight, but though one of those options or versions is going to help. 2 new pieces of information I want to put out there is, I did a lot of research, and Gwen, I sent it to you, and I think you forwarded it to everybody. If I read the Federalist Papers, because for 12 years our country existed under the Articles of Confederation, and that depended on cooperation and no one in charge. And then they had the Constitutional Convention, and if you read Federalist 70, that is the responsibilities and role of a chief executive in government, and the importance of having one person, an energetic person dedicated to the job. He has power, needs length of term of service. You can't have a person in charge with a 2-year hitch. It needs to be 4. He has to have the ability to make decisions. And when you read that, okay, and then when you read the other one that's super powerful is Federalist 10, about the function of government to oppose tyranny and the rights of the minority at the expense of the majority. These are powerful things that help guide us. And we look at our state, we have a governor. At the national level, we have a president. We're a small town. I think we could get an elected leader that has some responsibilities. And then you mentioned earlier, what's the challenges the town faces, okay? I analyzed all that economic data. I asked for it in January, and I put it all together for this meeting. And I know we're going to talk about it later, but there is a crisis in town that's been too silent for too long. And that is the defunding of our town budget by the state. And I'm of the opinion that's a crisis. And who will be the person to speak up against that, to take that on and to address it? If we look at the growth rate of the state budget, the education cost sharing grants for Bolton this year should be $1.2 million higher than they currently are. They're negative growth in 2008, 10-year track record. On top of that, the state has been defunding other things. The state's unwilling to look at their own budget issues. They've defunded pilot programs, payment in lieu of taxes. They've defunded road repairs. And then on top of that, about a year ago, they tried to go and make the town absorb 1/3 of the teacher's pension cost. And other things are going to be coming our way. And if we're going to address these challenges, and the state government's broke, the federal government's got major financial issues, I think we're going to need a strong leader to defend our town, and the towns have to take a stronger role in making sure they get the funding they need to run town government. I guess that's it.
Thank you, Jim. It just a question for you. Do you feel that a strong first selectman versus the kind of first selectman we have under the current charter, would one serve that function of being that aggressive proponent of town funding more than the other?
I believe that the first selectman's going to need, his role is going to be defined based on what happens with the Board of Finance, and that's where they merge together. And if the Board of Finance is eliminated, the role of the first selectman is greatly different than what it's been in the past, based on what I gather in our comments. Also, I think it's important to have redundancy in government. So in other words, the duties of the first selectman and the town administrator need to be set up so maybe that their terms are offset by 2 years. If you elect a new person to first selectman, you can't expect that guy day one to be able to run an organization like the town of Bolton and do it smoothly totally on autopilot. And the same thing, if we are having town administrators that have job career opportunities to go to a higher level, if that person leaves, who's his backup? So I believe that there's a chance to have a marriage of those two jobs in a way that we can recruit a good first selectman and a good town administrator. And if the town administrator is a 4-year cycle and he's on the offset of the first selectman, there's an overlap. But I thought Adam's point too about being able to change staffing and have more freedom to do that, I think that's an important factor in that process.
Thank you. Rich, did you want to say something now?
You're muted, Rich.
Sorry. Thank you, Gwen. Michael, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Hayes, I am here.
Good. So I want to make sure for everybody's edification that you get the next few words down verbatim. I'm very much in agreement with Adam Teller. So I think that Adam's right. I think a strong first selectman is the direction that we should travel in here. And I think that they should give the person the authority to hire anybody and anybody he needs or she needs in order for a support system. And at some point in the future, if the administrations change and the people that are now in power after the change of the administration, they need somebody other than the person that was there in the previous administration, then that changes. I mean, this happens all the time throughout the state of Connecticut. So, Gwen, I mean, I listened to your words and I understand what your concerns were. Obviously, it appears that you would much prefer, under normal circumstances, probably, and I want to make sure that I have this right, probably a town manager form of government. My issue with a town manager form of government is we are a stepping stone in this community, and we're never going to change that. So you are either going to, and the stepping stone works both ways, up and down. So Josh, let's take him for an example, and not because I'm singling him out, but he's stepping up. And if we found somebody, the only other person we're going to find is somebody stepping down. So late in their career, they want a job to, possibly finish up on a happy note in their life, and they, decide that they want to become a town manager of this type of community after stepping away from some much larger or more significant job. That may be something that we might attract. It's not dissimilar to what's happened with our Board of Education over the years. So the fact of the matter is, I think, and I don't know if it was Jay, That 6-year term thing scared me an awful lot. I had some off the record conversations with Adam that maybe I shouldn't share, but I will share, because I think that a 2-year term is much more appropriate. Initially, I was convinced that a 4-year term might be the direction the town should travel in. But after having some conversations with Adam, he's made me see a different side of that. So I think that helps you regulate if we get a one-off by any party. Who knows, maybe an independent party. It doesn't need to be a Democratic Party or Republican Party. If you get an anomaly in there at some point in time and you feel that you don't want to be there, that person, you don't want them there for whatever reason for 4 years, this gives you that opportunity to get them out in 2. And you have to suffer through the 2, and that's part of the life, the political world. The other thing that I wanted to point out was I also think Adam's right. In regard to how the charter has worked in this town, I've seen a lot of failures in regard to that. I don't want to get into the details of what I think could change, but the reason that I was so interested in getting on this commission to begin with, because I think we needed to make some dramatic steps forward, not backward, not sideways, but forward. And so to do that, you got to make some big changes. And I think that Jim Aldridge makes a very good point. If it is the intention of this commission to, at some point in time, make the decision to eliminate the Board of Finance, then that changes the dynamic of that strong first selectman significantly. And so I think that has to be, I almost think that those two have to go hand in hand here. I think we're missing a piece of the puzzle by just taking on the first selectman conversation, or town manager or town administrator or whatever other discussion you want to have, without talking about that Board of Finance piece. So, and I know everybody has different thoughts on that. Thank you.
Rich, I just wanted to correct your impression of where I stand right now. It's not, right now I'm not supporting a town manager form of government. I'm more supporting just keeping a first selectman town administrator form of government and clarifying the role of the town administrator. And I would also support changing the term. But I'm still keeping an open mind, because the more I hear, the more confused I get.
Well,
Which
it wasn't my intention to confuse you, Gwen, so I hope I didn't add to that. But, and I'm sorry I misconstrued what you were saying, because I felt that I wrote down several things that you said. And one of the things I think that, Bolton can be very attractive to certain types of people based on just the quality of life that we offer here, that you can't get in a big city or, a much larger suburban area. And I think that some people might make a concession for that. Here again, I don't know for certain, but thank you for correcting me.
No, yeah, you're welcome. Jay, did you want to say something?
Oh, I had one question, and it's probably a stupid question, which is, would we be able to, if we are advocating a strong first selectman, and this becomes less important with a shorter term, but more important with the longer term, and I don't know if we would technically be able to do this in the charter, but could we stipulate that a first selectman would have to resign before running for another office?
I think, aren't there statutes that deal with that?
Well, I'm interested to understand what you mean by another office. So if they wanted to be, let's say, the senator and the first selectman at the same time, or the state legislator and the first selectman at the same time, that would concern you, Jay?
Well, actually, what would concern, so this is a way to address, so, one of my concerns is the stepping stone thing. So, I think we're a stepping stone both on a town manager or town administrator path. I think we're also a stepping stone on a political path. I mean, first selectman is a stepping stone to state representative, which is a stepping stone to state senator, which is a stepping stone to nowhere, right? But but the question I have is it would dissuade people from viewing the strong first selectman job as a stepping stone job if they had to resign their position before declaring themselves as a candidate. So not if they won, right? I don't want you to be able to, run the election and then see how it works out for you. What if you had to commit? If you wanted to go be a representative, fine, but you got to quit your job as a first selectman first. This is really an academic question, but it would kind of help me address that question about the political stepping stone side on the strong first selectman model.
Oh boy. Sorry, I think my video is frozen, so I can't raise my hand. It's Adam.
Okay. Go ahead, Adam.
I would really think that we wouldn't be able to say that in a charter, but because it affects somebody's ability to participate in political activity, and that's constitutional. I don't think the power to write a charter includes the power to affect who can be a candidate for office.
Yeah. I mean,
it would be nice if it could, maybe, but I don't disagree with you there. But I don't see how that's within the scope of the things you can, because you're not affecting your town. Then you're affecting some other office, some larger office.
Actually,
it's
you're not.
That they're going to.
You can run for that other office all day long. You just have to leave our job first.
Sure, but you're basically telling somebody that while they're serving as first selectman, they can't exercise their First Amendment rights or their constitutional rights to stand for office. And that's not any different than saying they can't speak on other issues. And how do you really police that? They can, run for the office without actually claiming to be a candidate until the last minute. They have to file their petition or file, so it's sort of,
yeah. This is more of a funsy question than anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand the purpose. I am not, but
can I shot? Adam?
Yeah,
Hello?
sorry.
I'm sorry. So the only thing that I might, comment on that may persuade Jay is the good news is that, when you run for first selectman and you run for any legislative office, whether it's Senate or state legislator, it's on alternating years. So you would only have to put up with it for a year and then you could change it at the polls. I guess that's really the point I'm trying to make. But I'm kind of with Adam on this as well. Guys, I don't think that we should infringe on somebody's rights. Thank you.
Isn't the mayor of Vernon a senator?
Oh,
Yes, you're correct, as well as the mayor down in, she's the first select person down in, not Pomfret, but down that section of the state. She's a senator as well.
Jim, did you have something that you wanted to share with the group on a screen?
Not right now, but you had something up on the screen, but I have 3 screens going. I have some extra capabilities. So if you could just enable that for future, I'd appreciate it.
So Michael, could you tell me how I can enable others to share a screen?
Yes, I believe that I can. So normally, let me just zoom out. Normally, currently have 1 participant can share at a time, advanced participants. I've set it such that all participants can now share. We'll leave it on who can start sharing when someone else is sharing. We'll leave that on only host for now because it doesn't affect our options. What you should see right now, Mr. Aldrich, you are about to share something, yes?
No, I don't need to right now.
Okay, well, what you should see down at the bottom of your screen, there should be a new icon, which is in green that says share screen. That should have popped up.
Matter of fact, I lost my green perimeter on all my screens.
Interesting. I've just given everyone else the option, I do believe,
So I've,
to share.
yeah, I can't even see anybody on the screen anymore.
Huh.
There we go. Let me try this. What about the, nope, not that. This. Oh, everybody's back. And hang on a second. So I lost everything. Sure.
Yes.
Oh, I have the ability to share screen now. Yes.
Perfect. Yes. So now when that comes up, that will be available to everyone in the committee.
Thanks, Michael. I had one quick comment to make. One thing that I wanted to, I researched that I think we should throw out for consideration, no matter what happens with the first selectman or the town administrator, is it is legal in Connecticut for the first selectman, if we had a full-time first selectman, to also be on the Board of Education. If we're going to contemplate the elimination of the Board of Finance, I think that would be more palatable to people if there was a greater linkage of the selectmen, instead of having a bias towards the general government budget at the exclusion of the Board of Ed. This is the practical guide here, Connecticut school law. And in there, it states that it's been tested in the courts, the appellate court, and everyone to the state Supreme Court, that the mayor can be also a member of the Board of Ed. In terms of contemplating that as a charter change, I'd want to make sure that the Board of Ed and the school people would be supportive of it, but it's an idea that might be recommended to consider contemplation for that as a way to checks and balances, transparency, a lot of the issues brought up with the evolving roles of selectmen.
Good, thank you.
Gwen, just for, if I could for 1 minute, just for the record, the senator's name that's also the first selectman of the town of Sprague, Connecticut, in the quiet corner, is Kathy Osted.
Okay.
So she's also a first selectman and a senator.
Okay. So let's get back to our discussion. Are we? How do we feel here? I mean, do we have Eleanor? I'd like to kind of just focus in on this conversation about where we're going. It sounds like we don't have full support for town manager. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is some support for strong first selectman. There's some support for first selectman town administrator. Eleanor, what were you going to say? Unmute, Eleanor.
Is that better?
Yes.
It was very interesting to me a couple minutes ago what Jim said about how he sees the things in town changing financially with state defunding and things like that. And I think the changes that are coming up ought to be taken into account as we make this kind of a decision. And for me, it seems to make a really strong case, Jim, for a strong first selectman, because somebody who's going to be on top of those changes needs to hold both the authority and the responsibility, not have those things divided between a first selectman and a town manager or a town administrator. When you give one person the authority and the other person the responsibility, sometimes things can't get done effectively. And with some of the changes that you were talking about coming up with defunding of towns by the states, it seems like those two things, responsibility and authority, ought to go hand in hand. I think that's a really good case for a strong first selectman.
Adam, is your position, are you in support of a strong first selectman? I mean, that's what Rich said he thought when Rich said he agrees with Adam on that. Adam, are you there?
You're on mute.
Here.
You're still on
Adam,
mute,
Adam, do a sound check for us, would you?
There. Yeah. Okay, there. Sorry, I'm having a little computer problem for some reason, even though I'm on the phone. Yeah, I mean, my preference is a stronger first selectman and probably a strong first selectman, but again, my concept of a first selectman is one that has it involves really eliminating the position of town administrator or administrative officer entirely from the charter and leaving to the board of selectmen and the first selectman the choice of what staff they hire and what they need, and then giving the first selectman a 4-year term with specific, abilities and obligations. But that's a clear second to me to a town manager. So, because I'm skeptical that we'll get enough qualified candidates over the long term. But right now we have one. So
you think that the town manager position, there will always be a group of people to pull from, and there will always be a good candidate?
I do, and I don't think the stepping stone issue is all that big a deal, because again, we have evidence of that from the ability to hire decent school superintendents, and also the fact that somebody spends 5 or 6 years here and then moves on doesn't mean that there's not a crop of candidates equally as good to replace them. It's a nationwide pool now, and this is not an unattractive place to live or work.
But
not to me.
Don't you see the town administrator role and the town manager role as being fairly similar?
Well, they have been now, but that's because that's not really by charter. That's sort of more or less by accident, if you know what I'm saying, or by vacuum, something expanding to fill.
I don't follow that, because I compared some charters that have town manager form of government and town administrators. I compared town manager governments with our charter and the roles set forth in our charter, and they're quite similar. There's more authority given to town managers.
To me, there's 2 things that town managers have that town administrators don't really have. One is the power to hire and fire without asking anybody. Okay, subordinate officers. Maybe at some level of department head, they have some check on that, but everything else, they hire somebody, they fire somebody. They're responsible for that, and nobody tells them they can't do it. And the second is for preparing and presenting a budget that gets an up or down vote.
Well, Sandy said that Josh prepares the budget.
Yeah, but then they have these budget committee meetings and so on, where the selectmen actually, line item stuff. Whereas to me, a town manager presents a budget and it's approved or disapproved. And if they don't like the number, they send it back to him and he or she redoes it. But it's much more that town manager's budget. The other thing is that, a town manager is the chief executive officer. They represent the town outside the town.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be some of what we're looking at here is that, I think the one thing that the charter, if we do this division of responsibility between town administrator or administrative officer and first selectman that's not a classically strong first selectman, it ought to be decided who's the person that's representing the town outside the town. And that ought to be the first selectman, not the town, and not the town administrator or town or administrative officer. And it ought to be made very clear in the charter that the person who goes to outside meetings or who represents the town is the first selectman, unless the first selectman delegates that authority expressly, and maybe even in writing, you know, that nobody goes and represents the town outside the town but the first selectman. Because that's, to Jim's point about advocating for the town to the legislature or to the governor or whatever else, that's the only way that person is going to have that ability, is if they're specifically the only person who speaks for the town. So again, I don't know where we are on this, because it doesn't seem like we have a clear, strong first selectman majority, but maybe I'm wrong.
Jay?
Yeah, I'm against that. I kind of lean the other way. I'm perfectly okay with the town administrator being pretty much the chief executive officer with limits, and with them representing the town. So unless you're going to have a full-time first selectman, I think, you know, going to those CCM meetings and going to those workshops and stuff, even going to do legislative liaison work, the person who's in the town all day long, signing checks and living the town life, either if that's the administrator, I think that works fine. Now, yeah, is it somebody we elected? Maybe, maybe not. And, you know, well, it wouldn't be if it was the administrator. But, you know, is that necessarily what we need to advocate for us? I mean, you know, I'm perfectly fine. I look at government as a profession. Lobbying is a profession. You know, I'm not necessarily sure that we can pick from among the current citizens of Bolton who are looking for a job and who feel like running for an elected job a better lobbyist than we could hire on a search for a qualified town administrator. So I diverge from you there, Adam.
But that's an argument for having a town manager.
Yeah, but I mean, we could do the same thing with a town administrator.
Not really.
I don't like the idea of dividing the authority. That's what I don't like.
I think we are allowed to designate the town administrator as the chief executive officer of the town.
Yes.
Yeah, then you're saying to them, I mean, then you're trying to get something for cheap, and you might not get the quality. I mean, it's one or the other. Either you make that person the person who's really responsible for all those things and give them both the responsibility, you know, and the accountability and the power, or you don't. And I sort of, I mean, it's tricky because I feel like you get somebody who's not really accountable to anybody doing all those things, you know, because maybe the problem is, you know, to me, even if somebody is removable by only a majority vote of the select board, that's still a pretty big step for people to take and to fill those shoes on short notice. So they'll let somebody get away with an awful lot of abuse or abuse of power or you know, borderline incompetence or lots of things before they stir themselves to remove a town administrator who's the chief executive officer but isn't doing that great a job. Whereas when it's the town manager, I mean, you're going to give that person a couple of years the first time around, and then you're going to, if they're doing a good job, I mean, it's a different it's a different horse to me. And I fear this situation where the town administrator has just enough power to stay in that office, but not enough, you know, gravitas or credentials or training or any of those things to do a really great job. And I'm afraid that that's where you're headed if you make this kind of hybrid thing.
Rich, were you going to say something?
Thank you, Gwen. I just want to piggyback on Adam's thought there for a minute. Jace really, in my opinion, is advocating more for a town manager than a town administrator. And the one fear that I have with a town manager is that it's a much more political position than a town administrator. And I think that that could have ramifications in the big picture as well, especially in a small town like Bolton. That's all. Thank you.
Wait, Rich, in what way do you think a town manager is more political than a town administrator?
Oh, on so many different levels, Gwen. I mean, my experience with town managers versus town administrators has been diverse, believe me when I tell you. And I just understand the whole aspect of how they handle themselves. And I understand what happens when administrations change. I've seen all of those pieces of the puzzle up close because of what I do for a living. And I do see how they make decisions, especially in an election year, when it becomes what I'll refer to as silly season. The last 6 months before, from July until November, you know, town managers make decisions based solely on politics, and it's just a very difficult environment to do business in. So those are the things that you have to take that into consideration. And I can recite dozens upon dozens of examples of that. And I don't think a town administrator has that same latitude. And I think that that's one of the things that is of concern to me. At least I haven't had that experience with a town administrator. I should clarify that. Thank you.
John, were you going to say something, John? Your hand is up.
Yeah, Rich, could you, I don't want dozens of examples, but could you give us one or two?
You know, John, I'd be happy to, as long as we weren't on a recording.
Carlton, Billy, and Sally that live in any town USA. We don't need to know true specifics.
I got one example.
But an example, I think an example would clarify it.
I'd like to give an example. We met the town administrator for Columbia and the town manager from Coventry. And I thought they both came across very well. It's been in the news tremendous amount about a police officer in Coventry who had an inappropriate relationship.
Oh, yeah, the one that just left. Yep.
With a minor girl there. And what happened was, instead of that being resolved quickly with the police officer maintaining his reputation and leaving the town and going someplace else, that mother pushed and pushed. The town manager said that since he's the CEO, he had to be the final arbiter of this. So they brought in a third-party legal firm to help resolve this, and then he was going to take that information. And so this went on really, I'd say, years in the media. And in the end, the officer left the department. That should have happened almost immediately.
Years ago, yeah.
I don't understand why something like that drags off. And my father-in-law was a principal in a large community, and he used to tell me stories about his inability to eliminate people. That's kind of Adam's argument, and that if he had someone who was really bad, it usually took him 3 years to get him removed from government, and he would show me the files. The files were about 6 inches thick in appeals and broadcast. It was just, it's an enormous challenge. I think with, and that's the political aspect of the town manager's role.
You don't think this would have happened with a town administrator?
I think if there was an elected official who lived in that town, I think that cop would have, in private, there'd be a conversation, and I think that guy would have been gone 2 years ago.
Well, they do have a mayor there, though, don't they? Isn't that what?
Yeah, yeah, they do. Yeah. Rich, do you have another example?
John, I'll give you
More
one.
not than the last one?
I'll give you one that'll piggyback on Jim. It's something that transpired in the community about 15 years ago or so, where a planner was not doing his job as efficiently as he should have been at the time. And he had a bad habit of exploring the internet for inappropriate material. And the town administrator, excuse me, it was a town manager form of government in this community. And the town manager could not fire this gentleman until such time that he could get all of the people behind him from a political standpoint. And it took longer than it should have, John.
Okay.
All right, well,
So is this the point where we ask all in favor of a strong first selectman? Just kidding.
I,
But I think we've made a case.
Gwen, it is 8:45.
yeah, I think we should wrap up our conversation soon, but I don't want to, I mean, at some point we have to decide. We have to make a decision. And I don't know if we want to let this go until July so we can all think about it again, but we can't keep bumping it along every month because we just cannot come to a decision. And so, yes, Jim.
One of the things that bothers me about the process is, why can't there be a scenario where we can offer the voters two alternatives? Okay, I think that would be great regarding offer two visions for town leadership. And here's the thing, it's a 10-year hitch. In terms of referendums, do they always have to go down or can they go up? Why can't we offer either or scenario? Instead of taking the charter and trying to make it one vote all in or all out, and if we make too many changes, we're going to lose on everything. I think that's a damaging process. So let's just say the selectmen won't allow us to have the charter be 3 questions, all the generic items, and then form of government and board of finance. Let's just say we can't do it. Can we use the power of the internet and offer 2 alternatives and have a website and publicize it and get the community, see what the community has support for, and do some polling that way, and do that over the course of the next month or 2?
Oh, you mean poll people before they actually vote on a charter?
I'm suggesting let's instead of going into all the drafting and all the details, let's offer 2 generic visions of what we could have. And one might be town manager, one might be stronger form of government. And let's get the word out and see if we can get 500 to 1,000 people in town to weigh in on this, and with a website that's polling and linked to registered people for only 1 vote per person.
But then the ultimate vote will have to be at the polls next November. And
Not this November, next November, 2021.
next November.
But it's a way to see if where's the consensus in the community.
So Jim, is it similar to, I did some research on budgets after Jay and I had a conversation several meetings ago about whether the budget should go up or down. And one of the things that I learned is, a lot of these communities have advisory questions on their referendums. Is that what you're looking, something similar to that?
It would have to be informal because we can't go to the voting booth for this, but I'm trying to suggest a means of us trying to vet 2 different ideas out to the community instead of us as a group of 7 saying that one vision or the other, we're all in on that at this juncture.
I think it might be time for us to really think about what we want to do and come to some kind of consensus before we try some unusual way of trying to think what people want. I think we really need to think about this just a little bit harder, and maybe more things in proposals in writing for the pros and cons of each of the three types of whatever we really want. And there's always keeping the same. We don't need to write anything down about that. But do we want a strong mayor, strong selectman form of government? Do we want to try a town manager or keep a town administrator? But I think it's going to get very dicey trying to throw in automated polls, and it's just, I think it's cumbersome, and it needs to be something that's available to all registered voters.
Eleanor?
And I think at some point we should be having another public meeting. I know we can't be meeting in public, truly in public, but I think it's time to ask more people to join us on one of these calls, or there may come a time where we can meet in a larger public space than town hall, so that people can come and be far enough apart, but present their ideas.
Eleanor, what were you going to say?
I was going to try out a suggestion. There's been lots of really good arguments raised about town managers, administrators, and strong for selectmen tonight. And if we could take the minutes and make a little chart of pros and cons for each one, it might be a nice thing to put that, like Jim suggested, use the power of the internet and see what kind of, just to throw out pros and cons for each of these forms, and then see what comes back to us in the form of public response. Is that sort of what, along the lines of what you would suggest, Jim?
I'm just trying to find
Go ahead, Jim.
just trying to find some way to, if we can't get a consensus, how do we get some outreach to see if there's a majority of people that prefer one option instead of the other in town?
These sound like, Glenn?
My concern about that is that we think about how hard we all have been the seven of us have been thinking about this issue, and how we've looked at tons of different charters, and we have personal experiences. We've had interviews with people. We've talked to the Board of Education. We've talked to Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the input. I do not downplay the input of the public at all, but I don't know how helpful that's going to be, because they're not going to have as informed opinions as we are able to form here. I think it's better for the seven of us to come up with a unified, or maybe not unified, but a majority opinion, and make that recommendation.
I agree with Gwen on that. I don't think we'll get informed or considered opinions if we throw it out there. I think we'll get a lot of, weighing in, but not well thought out weighing in.
Adam just when will the meeting minutes for this be available? Because I just want to read through all these people's arguments again.
Yes. Well, Michael does them, and Michael's going to do them in draft form as we requested. And
So-
Michael, how soon do you think you'd be able to have a draft done?
This one might take. It's not going to take as long as this last one. This last screw up actually happened because there was a software error where the town clerk could not accept the minutes as long as I had watermarked draft on the back, which was comical in that was the specific request of the commission. Regardless, the arguments today have been very precise, and I really want to make sure that I capture everyone's meaning. So I'm going to go back and read through everything again, and then listen back through once to make sure. But I imagine that I'll have these out by Sunday.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Rich, you had something to say?
No, I think John was first. I'll wait my turn.
Okay, John?
Oh, thank you. Uh-oh. As an aside, one of the things we should do is make it a form of four-year terms. Sorry. Perhaps the municipalist postings in the Bolton Bulletin could include these discussions of what we're talking about. And I don't think we need to ask what they think, but we're showing people what we're doing. And maybe, we have these three different ways that we're trying to ideas to come up with, and maybe present each one week at a time and see if there's any response, or at least people be informed without having to go through internet polls and all kinds of rigmarole like that.
Mhm. I think that's a good idea. Rich?
Adam, I have a question for Adam, if I might, Gwen. Do you believe that in November of 2021, that we're going to be dealing with more informed people based on their ability to look at the entire product?
Well, remember, we have to have a public hearing. And then I think the Board of Selectmen have to have a public hearing. And then there'll be a finished product out there for people to read for a period of time before. And then, to some extent, it's on us and the Board of Selectmen and whatever resources the town chooses to publicize that and present these arguments. I think we're always, this is a perennial issue for our town, is that there'll be 10 or 15 people making a particular decision or participating, and they have really good reasons for the decisions they make and really good information. But then when it goes out to the public, it's very hard to get that same quality of discussion out there. And it could devolve into, just trolling on the internet. So I would hope, and unfortunately, this is a very bad time to do anything where people actually have a true give and take discussion on a larger scale. But I would hope that some of us would be at those meetings, those public meetings, and speak about why we came to this and what struggle we had to get to these points, and how, that despite that we're a group of fairly diverse viewpoints from both ends, or let's call it all compass points of the political spectrums, that, we could come together with a conclusion for them and hope that they'll join it. You have to do the rest of the work once you come up with something to convince people that it's a good idea.
Mhm.
And I guess our hope is that we have a consensus at the end that allows each of us individually to go out there and say, well, you may think of me as a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or a Green Party person, but I sat down with 6 other people from all different viewpoints, and this is, everything that you could think of to object to this, we heard about it and we came up with this because it had strong support, and try to help them go through that same process, right? But if you don't do that, it's a crapshoot, is what I think. And I've lost my video, so I'm not sure if you guys can see me or.
No.
No, but you're coming through loud and clear. Thanks, Adam.
But
And I do think that we are going to have to present a product, an actual document, a red line document
Right.
to the town to vote on. I do not think we can say to them, oh, we're thinking about this. Like, do you want maybe this or maybe this?
right.
It's going to
No, I
be,
agree.
there's going to be a document sitting there and people are going to be able to actually look at it. And so I don't think that we're going to want to draft 2 separate documents, one with a strong first selectman form of government, one with a first selectman town administrator form of government. because the work involved in drafting two separate documents is going to be just hellish. And there's not going to be, they're looking to us, the town is looking to us for leadership, as we are the Charter Commission. We are the people invested with the responsibility to come to a recommendation to them. I don't think people are going to want to come to the polls and look at two different documents and say, well, I'm not sure. I don't know which one I want. So I think we are just going to have to go through this hard process of figuring out what we think is best for the town of Bolton and working it out among ourselves. And maybe it won't be 7-0 on one side. I mean, maybe it will be, maybe some of us won't be able to come to a unanimous decision, but at least we should be able to come to a majority decision. And if I'm in the minority, I will certainly support the majority, and I hope that the rest of you feel that same way. So it's 8:57, and I believe that we should just pick up this conversation again next month. We'll read the minutes of this meeting. That I think it'll be helpful because we've all shared a lot of good information, a lot of good views. And let's try to hone in on exactly what the problems are with the current administration and what we think needs to be done to solve those problems. Because I think that's really the basis of that's the foundation of our whole goal, of our whole discussion. If we're going to change the form of government, why are we changing it? And what's a better solution?
But you didn't mean the current administration, Gwen, did you?
No.
You mean the charter?
The charter is what.
Right.
Yes.
That's-
No, I didn't mean. I wasn't referring to people at all. I don't even know.
Okay.
I don't even know what I said.
Well, I maybe I misheard it. I'm sorry.
I doubt it. So I'm sorry if I misspoke. No. So think about what we've got going in our terms of our current charter. If there are problems, what are they, and how is another form of government going to solve those problems?
My concern is timeline.
Yes.
The current rate of progress.
I know.
People have issues about the.
Yeah, but once we break the logjam, we're not.
I agree.
We're not,
I really do think things will speed up once we do the heavy lifting of the Board of Finance issue and the form of government issue. Then I think the other ones are going to go pretty fast.
we're
Even the
not
Board
even
of
halfway
Finance
through the
issue
process.
is.
Hold it, John. What were you going to say?
We're not even halfway through this process when this has to be done by January of 2021. And this may be a crazy idea, but between the time the town clerks gets a hold of it and processes it properly, from that point until the election day of 2021, perhaps we could keep meeting with the public to explain it. You know, go to each board, go to the senior center, have open meetings for citizens to come, and we can explain what we mean.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
But I hate to say, it's like, well, we can keep meeting until November of 2021. That'll be fun.
That's a man that's retired speaking, everybody.
Yeah.
Just for
Yeah, really.
It is indeed.
Because
Well, you could.
because it may be 9 o'clock, but I've had weeks where I'm not
Yeah, we're
leaving
done.
before now.
Yeah, we're done. It's 9 o'clock, Madam Chair.
So the next meeting is, I think it's July 16th. Let me
Mhm.
see.
July
Yes,
16th.
it's Thursday, July 16th. So please, I know that you all will give this a lot of thought because you all have been very thoughtful up to this point. Let's continue the conversation about form of government, and in July, maybe we'll be able to meet in person, which maybe it'll even help the conversation go. I mean, I think the conversation goes well now, but maybe there'll be something magical about being in each other's presence, which will just all of a sudden just make all the issues become totally clear when we see.
Only if there are glasses of wine involved.
Yeah. Yes. So thank you all for your really good work as usual. The next item of business is correspondence. I have none. And is there anything else under other? Rich?
No, thank you.
Rich, did you have something?
No, I'm sorry, Gwen, I was just pushing the leave button,
Oh.
the meeting
Oh,
button.
boy.
That's why my hand went up.
All right, well, it's exactly 9 o'clock. I'm going to consider the meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everybody. We'll see you in July.